1995, South Central Los Angeles. A movie theater on opening weekend. A black man is sitting in the dark watching a film about his neighborhood, his block, his city, his life. He is watching himself on screen. Not because his name is in the credits, not because any director called him, but because the man who wrote the movie grew up around him, watched him, was afraid of him, and turned him into the most memorable character in one of the most beloved black films ever made. The character's name is Deebo, the bully who steals bikes and gold chains and slaps people senseless in broad daylight. The man the entire neighborhood moves around like weather. The man who walks into a room and makes grown mom go quiet without saying a word. The audience is laughing, because in the movie, Deebo is comic relief. The neighborhood bully who terrorizes one block, who gets his chains snatched, his bike stolen, his victims, until Craig Jones puts him on the ground in the final reel and the whole theater cheers. It is a comedy, a classic, one of the most beloved black films ever made. But the man the character was based on is not laughing, because in real life, the story is not a comedy. In real life, the man behind Deebo ran one of the largest criminal enterprises in the history of Los Angeles, used a charity funded by the city government and donated to by NBA superstars to finance a criminal organization, the FBI, compared to the mafia. Held power over an entire city through a system of tribute and fear so complete that Grammy-winning producers let him use their studios for free. That NBA players paid six-figure sums to resolve disputes in his name. And in January 2021, federal prosecutors say he drove to Las Vegas, found a 21-year-old aspiring rapper he had once coached in high school, and that young man was found dead in the desert off Interstate 15. His name is Eugene Henley Jr. The streets called him Big U. And this is the story of the man Hollywood turned into a joke, and what he actually was. Before you understand what Big U built, you have to understand what South Central Los Angeles was in 1976. The Rollin 60s neighborhood Crips were forming in the streets around Hyde Park on the west side of South Los Angeles. Not a small operation, not a local crew that controlled one block. One of the largest Crip sets ever to emerge in the entire history of Los Angeles, eventually spreading to Seattle, Portland, Atlanta, Baltimore, Las Vegas, Nashville, and dozens of cities across the country. Membership estimated between 6,000 and 8,000 people. The largest black street gang in the city of Los Angeles at their peak, according to LAPD assessments. They wore the Seattle Mariners logo and the Chicago White Sox logo to represent their colors without displaying obvious gang symbols. They controlled territory stretching across Hyde Park, View Park, and the Crenshaw district. And their rivalry with the 8-Tray Gangster Crips, the most violent gang-on-gang feud in Los Angeles history, helped split the entire Crip alliance into two factions that defined street politics in South Central for the next 4 decades. Eugene Henley grew up in that world. He did not join the Rollin 60s because he drifted into them. He joined them the way certain men join certain organizations, because he recognized something in their structure, their reach, and their power that matched the specific kind of ambition he had been carrying since he was old enough to understand what power meant in South Central Los Angeles. He was not the flashy type, not the man who bought the cars and wore the chains and made himself visible in ways that drew law enforcement attention. The men who operated that way in South Central during the 1980s tended to have short careers. The men who lasted understood something more fundamental. Control was more valuable than product. The man who controlled access to territory, to peace, to resolution, controlled everything else. You did not need to sell anything if you were the person everyone had to come to before they could sell anything at all. That was the specific understanding that Eugene Henley built his entire operation around. In the 1980s, when the LAPD attributed 13 homicides in a single year to just one rival organization, and when the epidemic that had consumed South Central's housing projects had turned every corner into both a market and a battlefield, Big U was becoming the man you came to when you needed something settled. Not a supplier, not a street-level operator, an enforcer of order. In the specific ecology of South Los Angeles in that era, the man who could end a conflict, resolve a dispute, and make two parties walk away without further escalation was worth more than any product on any corner. He was essential, and essential men do not get removed. They get paid. Big U built that reputation block by block through the 1980s, and then came 1991. The same year, Ice Cube and DJ Pooh sat down to write the screenplay that would become Friday. The same year, they would transform the specific energy of South Central into one of the most beloved comedies in the history of American cinema. Eugene Henley was arrested. A sting operation, an undercover Los Angeles sheriff's deputy. The details of what went wrong are less important than the outcome. 13 years in federal prison. He went in as a street enforcer with a reputation that made the people around him move carefully. He came out as something far more dangerous, a man who had spent 13 years studying. 2004. Big U walks out of prison. South Central has changed. The gang truces negotiated in the wake of the 1992 riots, an agreement between the Rollin 60s, the Bounty Hunter Bloods, the Grape Street Crips, and other major sets, had changed some of the dynamics of street conflict. The violence that had defined the late 80s and early 90s had receded from its peak. New economies had emerged, and hip-hop had happened. The music that had grown out of South Central, out of the exact streets where Big U had built his reputation, had become a global billion-dollar industry. Artists from Los Angeles were the biggest names in music. Death Row Records had produced some of the most commercially successful albums in history. The culture that the streets had created was now being consumed everywhere, and the connection between that culture and those streets, the authentication, the legitimacy, the specific credibility that came from being real in a world of people performing realness, that connection was worth something very specific. Big U understood exactly what it was worth. He came out of prison and walked straight into the music industry. His first move was Corrupt, one of the most respected West Coast rappers of the 1990s, a member of the Dog Pound, a death row artist with credibility that ran deep into the culture. Big U positioned himself as a bridge, the man who could introduce you to the right people, the man whose endorsement meant something in rooms where authenticity was the currency. Through Corrupt, he got to Suge Knight. Through Suge Knight, he was inside the infrastructure of West Coast hip-hop at its highest level. And then a teenager named Ermias Asghedom started recording music in the downstairs studio of Big U's family home. The world would know him as Nipsey Hussle. Big U was the first person to sign Nipsey to a deal. Production, management. He brought in Steve LaBelle as the frontman because, as Henley put it himself in a documentary interview years later, you know how hard it was to be Big U. My reputation precedes me. That reputation, the same reputation that had made him the most feared enforcer in South Central through the 1980s, was now an asset in the music industry. The original gangster who mentored young artists, the man from the streets who opened doors, the OG whose blessing meant something. He managed Corrupt. He launched Nipsey Hussle. He built Unique Music, his own record label, and then he did something that transformed his public image entirely. He started a charity, Developing Options Incorporated, a non-profit organization, a stated mission of reducing gang violence and providing opportunities for young people in South Central Los Angeles. A charity that received funding from the City of Los Angeles directly through the Mayor's Office Gang Reduction Youth Development Program. Federal money, city money, taxpayer money designated for the exact community that Eugene Henley had spent decades operating in. The optics were extraordinary. The man who had been one of the most feared figures in South Central, the man who had done 13 years in federal prison, had come home and committed himself to helping the next generation avoid the path he had taken. He was speaking at schools, appearing at community events, working with city officials, receiving grants from the mayor's office. And then FX came calling, Hip Hop Uncovered, a 6-part documentary series examining the intersection of hip-hop culture and the streets that produced it, executive produced by Big U himself. 6 episodes presenting him to a national audience as a reformed original gangster, a community activist, a mentor, a man who had walked away from the womb and was now using his influence to build something positive. The documentary streamed on Hulu. It reached millions of people who had never heard his name. He became the godfather of hip-hop. That is what people called him. Not the streets, the press. The platform he had built through music connections, through the charity, through the documentary, made him one of the most publicly visible former gang leaders in the country. The man who Deebo was based on had become a respected elder. That is what it looked like from the outside. Federal investigators were not looking from the outside. They were listening to the phones. The FBI's investigation into Eugene Henley and the Big U enterprise ran for 4 years. Wiretaps, financial records, witness interviews, a 107-page criminal complaint, and eventually a 43-count federal indictment that described in specific documented detail what was actually happening underneath the charity work and the documentary appearances and the mentor of Nipsey Hussle reputation. The charity was not what it appeared to be. When NBA players wrote checks to Developing Options Incorporated, when Grammy-winning producers donated, when corporations and athletes and entertainers gave money to an organization they believed was helping young people in South Central, court documents state that Big U immediately transferred those donations to his personal bank account. Shaquille O'Neal gave money. Draymond Green gave money. Both were defrauded, according to the indictment. Not a small amount lost to administrative overhead. The donations went directly into Henley's personal finances. The city grants followed the same pattern. Federal money designated for community programs was diverted. A COVID-19 pandemic relief loan application filed by Henley's music company, Unique Music, claimed the company operated at a $200,000 profit in 2019. Court records show the company actually operated at a $5,000 loss that year. The difference between those two numbers is the difference between qualifying for the loan and not qualifying. Prosecutors say the application was fraudulent, but the charity fraud, as extraordinary as it was only the surface layer sheet of what the Big U enterprise had actually built. Underneath it was the same system Big U had been running since the 1980s, just operated at a much higher level. The check-in system. If you were a high-profile person, an athlete, a celebrity, an entertainer, a businessman, coming to Los Angeles to operate in any way that touched the streets, you were expected to check in with Big U. Not because anyone sent you a formal request, because the understanding was in place throughout the culture. You checked in, you paid the appropriate tribute, and in return, you operated with the protection that came from Big U's endorsement. If you did not check in, the indictment documents, things went differently. In 2017, Henley recorded a video of a film crew operating in Hyde Park, his territory. On the recording, captured by federal investigators, anytime you want to do movies in the hood, just check it in. But if you don't check it in, we're going to check you in all right. We're going to check in all your equipment. This was not an empty warning. In June 2019, a professional boxer organized a private dice game in Los Angeles. The game involved NBA players. The boxer's associates used fixed dice to cheat the players. Because the boxer had not checked in with Henley before setting up the game on his territory, Henley dispatched members to confront the boxer, recover the players' money, and restore order. The boxer paid Big U $100,000 for the resolution. That is the Big U enterprise in operation. Not running product, not in the traditional sense of a gang controlling corners. Running leverage, the specific leverage of a man whose reputation was so completely established and whose connections to the Rollin 60s were so well understood that his presence in any dispute immediately changed the calculation for everyone involved. The indictment documents show that this system extended to extortion of businesses throughout Los Angeles, that it touched celebrities and athletes and entertainment industry figures at levels far above what any traditional street operation could reach. The documentary, the charity, the music career, they were not a departure from the enterprise, they were the enterprise. The public profile gave Big U access to rooms, to donors, to celebrities, to city officials, access that made his leverage more powerful than it had ever been on the street. You could not intimidate Shaquille O'Neal with the threat of physical confrontation. But you could build a relationship through a charity, earn his trust, and then redirect his donation. That is a more sophisticated operation than anything the 1980s version of Big U could have imagined. And then there was Rayshawn Williams. 21 years old, he was an aspiring rapper, signed to Unique Music, Big U's own label, a young man who had played wide receiver for Crenshaw High School's football team, a young man who had once played alongside Dion Henley on that same team, Big U's son, who would go on to become a linebacker for the Los Angeles Chargers. Big U had coached Rayshawn Williams. In January 2021, according to the federal complaint, Williams recorded a song aimed directly at Eugene Henley. A diss track. FBI Special Agent Andrew Rusa testified about the song in court proceedings. According to Rusa, the recording referenced Big U by name. It mocked his reputation. It questioned his standing. And in the song, according to investigators, Williams appeared to predict what would happen to him because of it. What followed is documented in the federal indictment and the 107-page criminal complaint. Big U arranged for Williams to record music at a Las Vegas studio. A studio owned by a Grammy-winning producer, identified only as Witness 2 in court documents, who, according to the complaint, made the studio available to Henley without charge, based on the power dynamic that the Big U enterprise maintained over him. Williams missed a scheduled session. Big U and his associate Sylvester Robinson drove from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. A witness identified as C.A. in court documents told investigators that Henley showed up at the Airbnb where Williams was staying. Williams said he had no transportation to the studio. They went to the studio together that night. Williams recorded music. Then they left separately. Rayshawn Williams was found deceased off Interstate 15 in the Las Vegas desert. Federal prosecutors say Henley is responsible. The 21-year-old he had coached, the same age as his son who was playing in the NFL, found in the desert, over a song. The federal complaint was unsealed. March 19, 2025. Before turning himself in, Big U recorded a video and posted it to social media. "This is probably going to be my last video. I'm going to turn myself in to see what's going on." He surrendered to federal agents that same day. A federal magistrate reviewed the evidence and denied bail, finding that Henley represented both a flight risk and a danger to potential witnesses. The 43-count indictment handed down by a federal grand jury charged Henley with conspiracy to violate the RICO Act, fraud, extortion, tax evasion, embezzlement of charitable donations, and the most serious federal charges the government can bring. The acting United States attorney said at the press conference, "The allegations reveal a criminal enterprise led by a supposed anti-gang activist and purported music entrepreneur who was nothing more than a violent street criminal." The FBI's assistant director in charge said, "The FBI and our partners have worked for 4 years to bring justice in this case." Henley's attorney stated that his client looks forward to a vigorous defense and maintains his innocence. He is currently in federal custody awaiting trial. 1995. The credits roll. The audience is still laughing. Deebo limping away from the block. Craig Jones getting the girl. The neighborhood returning to the slow, warm rhythm of a Friday afternoon in South Central. A man who was never in those credits walks out of the theater and back into his city. Hollywood had taken the most specific, most recognizable version of his particular kind of power, the neighborhood enforcer, the man people moved around like weather, and turned it into 2 hours of comedy. But the man himself had already understood something that the film could not contain. The neighborhood bully operates on one block, but the man who controls the city operates everywhere. For 30 years after that movie opened, Eugene Big U Henley Jr. built something that no Hollywood version of a neighborhood enforcer could have predicted. A criminal enterprise that prosecutors described as mafia-like, a charity that took money from one of the most beloved athletes in NBA history and a 4-time All-Star and pocketed it. A record label that launched one of the most iconic rappers Los Angeles ever produced. A 6-part documentary on a major streaming network presenting him as a reformed man giving back. And underneath all of it, the same system he had been running since the 1980s. Leverage. The man whose approval you needed before you operated in his city. The man who resolved disputes for a price and generated that price through fear that was never stated directly and never needed to be. The movie made Deebo famous. The federal government spent 4 years building a case against the real man. Eugene Big U Henley Jr., founding member of the Rollin 60s neighborhood Crips, 13 years in federal prison, music executive, charity founder, documentary subject, mentor to Nipsey Hussle, facing 43 federal counts, presumed innocent until a jury decides otherwise. But the wiretap is real. The words on that recording are part of the federal court record, and the FBI did not spend 4 years on a charity case.